I was under the impression that you had your leg broken by an irate fan once. Is that true?
Well, it was an irate person. I don't know whether he qualifies as a fan. it was a uh, it was a crazy person who was in the audience at a concert at a place called the Rainbow Theatre in England, 1970 or 71, can't remember. And we had just finished playing our encore. Half the band was already off the stage, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in the bottom of an orchestra pit with a concrete floor, with a broken leg, a broken rib, a hole in my chin, a hole in the back of my head, my neck all the way, my head all the way over on this shoulder. They thought I had a broken neck. About 3 or 4 thousand people sitting around going, huh? What happened? And, I woke up. I didn't even know that I was on the road, I just woke up. I wondered where I was. I never saw the guy. I wouldn't recognize him if we walked in this room right now. I spent a month in the hospital in England, 9 months in a wheelchair, and a few more months with an orthopedic brace on my leg. I was off the road for the better part of a year. During that period of time while I was in the wheelchair, I produced 4 albums. The albums were just another band from L.A., uh, Grand Wazoo, Waka Jawaka, and Reuben and the Jets for Real. I wrote a Broadway musical. I wrote about 6 orchestra pieces, and when my cast came off, I scratched my leg until all of the werewolf hair disappeared.
Thank you. You mentioned you don't particularly like to listen to pop music. When you're by yourself, what sort of music do you listen to?
Well, usually what I listen to is road tapes by the Mothers, because I have to go through them. We record all of our concerts, and once I get back off the road, I review that material and see if there's anything worth putting out on an album. And if I have any recreational listening time, I'll listen to rhythm and blues, or I'll listen to orchestra music.
All right, thanks.
And where this hotel, which is built out over the water and advertises that you can fish from your window, and supplies equipment to do this in the lobby. A number of rock and roll groups have stayed there, and some straight people as well, and they fished out the window and caught things like octopuses and mud sharks and so on and so forth. And these denizens of the deep were used for erotic procedures on willing participants in the hotel room. And that's what the legend of the mud shark is all about.
What was the collaboration you made some years ago with Zubin Mehta from the Los Angeles Philharmonic?
Well, I had an opportunity to have some scores performed with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, and they agreed to sort of a minimal budget for rehearsals, and we had a concert in a place called the Pauley Pavilion, which is a 14 or 15,000 capacity basketball arena. Not exactly the place you want to listen to a symphony orchestra, but it was filled to capacity for the concert, and it helped a little bit. And as a matter of fact, I saw Zubin just before we went on this tour. He was picking up some stuff at the airport. He says, "Oh yeah, I'll call you. We'll have lunch." Well,
That was the last time you'd seen him
Yeah,
prior to that time, right?
that's right.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you think that classical music in general, I mean, what comes out of the euphemistic phrase of classical music on records could stand a better shot for better sales if there was more exposure, or what? I mean, how could classical
Come on, spit
record
it out,
sales?
Mr. Krantz.
Right. How can I'm trying to rephrase it, restructure it. How do you think classical record sales could be improved in this country?
Well,
Right now they're about they're somewhere between 5 and 6%.
yeah, they're terrible. And the only way that they could be improved is if more people liked that kind of music and bought it. But you have a problem there in that, as far as the older classics are concerned, everybody gets a chance to hear those at one time or another, either on a radio station by accident. You're trying to find the one you like, and you hear a classical station, you get a little toot toot Beethoven, and you turn by. Or you might, in a music appreciation class in school, be confronted with some duck who wants to play you Peter and the Wolf and tell you that that's what's happening, And so I think that all of that has a tendency to turn people away from orchestra music, and the concerts, if you are ever induced to go see a concert of orchestra music, a young person might be turned away by the fact that you can hardly hear it compared to a rock and roll concert. I've gone to see orchestras and have sat in my seat straining to hear what's going on in the orchestra. Even when they're playing loud, it sounds so teeny-weeny up there compared to rock and roll. And so you're dealing with a generation of people who are accustomed to a higher dB environment. You know, their receptivity is based on whether the music affects their body as well as their ears. And when you can have orchestra music pummeling your chest, then I think that, and providing some sort of glandular stimulation, then the sales for those records are going to go up. The other problem is that the newer serious pieces, I think for the most part, are dreadful, and a lot of the new electronic music is even worse. It's just complete shuck. It's guys who can program a computer, turning over their function to a computer, and trying to convince the record buyer that these numbers that he has pumped into a machine are really worthwhile for listening purposes. You know, I think that the situation in serious music is pretty dreadful, not just from the standpoint of record sales alone, but from a creative standpoint too. There's no sense of humor in it. There's no sex in it. And as you know, without sex, nothing is any fun. So there's no get-off in it. And you have an audience that is highly oriented toward gratification. You know, it's a hedonistic society, so to speak. And so if it can't make you come one way or another, so why should you listen to it?
Well, there's a tremendous wealth, particularly of orchestral literature, you know, of orchestral pieces that a lot of people of this age have, you know, are just totally unfamiliar with, have never had an opportunity to hear, that really would excite them if they had an opportunity to hear them.
Well, maybe it would excite them, and maybe it wouldn't excite them. That's the thing.
Well,
you know?
but at least they would have an opportunity to make a decision, you know.
Well, that's what lending libraries are for. I think that record libraries or book libraries that have a record division are useful in that regard. If you want to go in and find out what he's talking about in terms of some of these stunning orchestral pieces, I think it'd be worth your time. Go listen to some of it. If you like it, go buy one and keep it for yourself at home so that you can show that your friends when they come over that you're really far out and have an orchestra record. I think that it's going to be a long time before the situation improves for orchestra music in the United States. This is an industrial society. The composer has no place in it, and the orchestra has a very tenuous position in it. Anything that resembles culture is sort of shunted off to the side as like some poofter remnant of European culture that was superimposed on us from a long time ago. You know, it doesn't really fit. You know, the concept of a symphony orchestra up alongside of a K-tel record ad on television is just too incongruous. I think that's really where we're at, is K-tel.
Well, yeah.
Are any of your orchestral scores published, or if anyone wanted to perform them, how would they go about doing it?
They're not published, no.
So there'd be no way to get a hold of any?
Orchestral materials can be rented, you know, but the problem of making them available is that since you're dealing on a one-shot basis, the cost of making oscillate copies of a full score and cranking out parts for an orchestra that wants to play it is pretty exorbitant. You know, when a piece of music is published, it's a losing proposition for orchestra music. It's very time-consuming to prepare the materials, and then, you know, once it's in actual print, then the rental fees to orchestras are very small. But if somebody wanted to get a hold of an unpublished score, it's expensive to prepare it.
And would you, or are you planning to do anything again like you did with the LA Phil? And, you know,
we've had maybe 5 or 6 offers from orchestras all over the world since that time, but it always seems like the wrong thing to do, because what they want really is to get the mothers as a rock and roll band to come in and play alongside of the orchestra so that they can improve their concert attendance. And so they use us as bait to bring kids into the concert hall with little or no regard for my music as something for an orchestra to play. And, you know, it's a shuck. And I felt that from what happened with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and have sort of avoided the orchestral experience ever since, because it's disheartening to spend that amount of time writing some music for an orchestra and know that they just don't give a shit when they get the music, and it's just another thing for them to do.
So there's no...
You have one thing, though. I don't know if you want to talk about it.
What's that?
Gregory? which is slick. There's something that he wrote which is really slick. I don't want to talk about it. Let him talk about it.
Well, some of you might have seen a performance at the Felt Forum in 1972 when I was in there with a 20-piece group, and we played a piece called The Adventures of Gregory Peccary. We played a couple of movements from that, and I finally have recorded that like last December. Went in and got a 20-piece group together and laid that down, did the complete version of it. And it's possible that that may be released in November.
Oh, wow. And that's orchestral.
Yes, right there, please.
Mr. Z, do you have a thing about poodle dogs, and where did you first find your zircon-encrusted tweezers?
Well, the thing about dogs is it's happening on a very rarefied conceptual level. As you'll see, there are references to dogs throughout the work, and the reference to the dog has nothing to do with a dog or the concept of a dog. It's just like, you can think of it as, you know, when Rembrandt did those paintings, to make them all look the same, he'd mix brown with every color, you know, to get that thing. So I said, well, that's a funny idea. I'll stick a little piece of a dog in every record. You see? And so on the next album, the concept of the dog has been brought down to the word arf in 2 songs, and another song called Evelyn the Modified Dog, which is included in there. And, you know, it's just a little bit all the way along. And the zircon-encrusted tweezers I've had for quite some time. The zircons were removed from Terry Wimberly's ring that he got because he thought Fats Domino had one.
I was wondering what you thought about. I have 2 questions. The first one was what you thought about unions, musical unions. Whether that was pretty well summed up in Rudy Wants to Buy Us a Drink, or if they're really doing something for the musician. And second of all, how and where is the cheese?
Okay, first about unions. As you know, the concept of a union is a good idea. It's something that was originally thought up, they say, to help people who work stand a better chance of getting good pay and good working conditions, and it's a bargaining co-op that is used for taking a collective group of people in a certain industry, and so they can bargain with the people who run that industry. Well, somewhere along the line it got corrupted, and the unions, especially in regard to the musicians union, don't really do very much for the average guy in the union. Like the LA Musicians Union is a great example. There's 16 or 18,000 people in that union. Out of those 16 or 18,000, maybe there's 1,000 who work all the time. And the business of the union is designed to keep those people at a good level of income because they're the ones that are in the studio. It seems like the union is run by the string players who play the backup dates and all of those Bobby V records and stuff, you know. It just got that whole kind of aura to it. And recently there was a scandal that ripped through the union where they discovered that $2 million had disappeared out of the treasury. And as a result of that disappearance, the union had to shut down 2 days a week. They couldn't even keep their doors open to cash people's checks. You know, it's that kind of a sleazy thing. And so I personally don't have too much respect for the musicians union from the experience that I've had with Local 47. And I think that that it doesn't really do that much for the average guy who's playing in a group, except to make his life miserable, taking tax away from him and making things inconvenient. It does not do very much to improve the lot of a person playing rock and roll music, unless you happen to be a violin player backing up one of those sessions. And your question about the cheese is she's had 3 automobile accidents, mostly head injuries, and she's probably still living in England.
Do you think the musicians' unions lack clout because they just are not as powerful as, say, the Teamsters union? Or is it just mostly you feel their own fault?
I think that what happens with a musicians' union is there's some guys in there who are very interested in taking home a good paycheck for themselves as union officials, and they don't care anything about musicians, and it's all a bunch of jive.
Okay. Yes, right there.
Yeah, could you tell me a little bit about Lord Buckley, if you have anything else coming out on him or anything like that?
No, I don't. Those were masters that were made available for just one album.
Yes, right there.
I'd like to ask Frank if his new album is going to be basically an instrumental album or vocal album or a combination of both.
There's only one instrumental piece on the album, and it's 2 minutes and 38 seconds long.
Thank you.
It's right there. Yeah.
Frank, I was curious to know whether or not you were pissed off last night.
Pissed off?
Yeah, so to speak, at the small crowd, the acoustics, everything in general. It seemed like you weren't into it, and then at the end you came out. I've seen you a few times, and I'm listening to music like back since Ruben and the Jets. And last night, like when you came out and did Willie the Pimp, you ran through it, and you just ran off stage, and that was it. The lights were on, and the show was over. I mean, was the curfew 11 o'clock? And even so, were you pissed off?
Well, I'm sure the curfew was 11 o'clock because there was a guy on the side of the stage giving me a 10-minute warning signal, so I don't know what the exact
Yeah, you finished
moment
at 10
was.
to
At
approximately.
10 to 11?
Yeah.
Okay, so that got him in without having any overtime. So now the promoter likes me. But as far as being pissed off, I would say that from the moment that I went on stage last night to the time I got off, I couldn't hear hardly anything that I was doing. If I was singing, I couldn't hear my voice coming out of the monitors. Couldn't hear any drums to find out where a beat was, and that's a very hard hall to work in. Just the physics of that hall have never been a fun place to work, and I think it's about the third time that I've played there.
Let me ask you another question.
What's that?
Could you explain 200 Motels to me?
Can I what? Explain
200 Motels, yeah.
what part of it?
Well, I saw it and I was pretty high, and I expected to get a lot out of it. I was pretty much,
Well, that's the
I was
problem.
lost. I saw Yellow Submarine, and I dug that,
Yeah,
at the
well,
time.
that was a Beatles movie.
Oh, yeah. No, really.
Well, really, that's about what it comes down to, but as far as coming in and being high and trying to get a lot out of 200 Motels, go in and see it without being high and try and figure out what's going on. I think that you'll have a better experience with it.
You're not going to try to explain it then?
Well, you asked me something specific, a detail about
Something specific. Well, what was the point of putting out 200 Motels?
it. Well, you see, I had this story and a concept of doing a surrealistic documentary on a group. A surrealistic documentary is something that takes actual events, paraphrases those events, and codifies those events to shrink them down to a size and a shape that people are going to be able to comprehend. However, I failed miserably in your case. And but the basic idea was to give a glimpse of what goes on inside of a band on the road in abstract concept kind of terms. I mean, the events that are referred to in that film literally did happen. There's a lot of stuff in there that's so true that it'd be too disgusting to even talk about it.
Frank, you had you did a concert at Geneva College last year, or at Hobart College in Geneva.
Yeah.
And you spent the whole time during the concert cutting down college students. And even on some of your albums, you talk about how ridiculous it is to go to college.
Well, first of all, I take exception to your claim that I spent the whole time cutting down college students.
Okay, most of the time.
No, I wouldn't even say that. First of all, I have better things to do than cut down college students.
Well,
I don't know why that you would presume that I do that. I will say this about school, though, and college in particular, that I'm not particularly fond of it. I went to one semester at junior college, and I went there for the express reason of getting some pussy, and I got some, and I got out of school. I've never... Oh, Don wants to say something.
If you want to be a different fish, you have to jump out of the school.
That was my question, thank you.
But as far as my view of the educational process, I would like it a lot if I felt for a moment, and I'm talking about my experience, and it's been a long time since I was in the school. I felt that they weren't teaching me anything; they were wasting my time, and I just resented it. And I was more than happy to get out.
Do you think that can be applied to schools as a whole? I mean, do you think that can be applied to all of us too?
Well, I don't think that I'm qualified to say that because I don't attend this school, and I don't know whether they do anything to teach you anything here, or what your motives are in going to the school, because a lot depends on whether you want to learn something or whether you're going to go to school like I did and go to college just to get some pussy, But I think that That is, yeah, let's get some pussy, yes. But, look, let's face it, if you want to get along in this world, you got to learn something. The only trouble is that what you need to survive is generally not presented in a school. You can get it easier out in the street, you know, and that's where I got mine.
Okay,
And it was cheap, too.
You were saying earlier about before you start a tour that you practice for about a month, and it's memory exercises. In a show like last night, aside from the time given to the individual musicians to improvise, can you change the order of songs? Because like from when you first came on, it was about an hour and a half before the music really stopped at all.
Yeah, you can change the order of songs.
So you're not really restricted to the same show every night in the exact order, because it seemed like one tight-knit unit, and I guess.
You can change the order of the songs at will, because there are ways of giving cues at the end of one song to indicate what the next tune is going to be.
Right. And one other thing, could you give me a hint at where Eric Clapton plays on Marlena for the Money?
He does not play, he only talks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, you know, in a way I can see what you're saying about school. You know, you're a self-made man, you know, in a lot of ways, no, you know, no bullshit. Right now I'm in a school of music and I'm taking like composition, and I feel right now that it is trying to helping me get my thing together, because I don't think I could have done it by myself, you know, just by books. You know, I'm not that brilliant, you know.
Well, when I talk about school, you got to understand that where I went to school and when it was. You see, I'm 34 years old, and I graduated from high school in 1958, and I'm sure that in that 20 years or whatever it's been, that there have been some improvements made in school. But when I wanted to find out about composition, there wasn't anybody to tell me about it. And the best they could do was say, well, if you'll go to the library and get this book and study from this book. And I said, well, I don't need this guy to tell me to go to the library. And that's why I got out. I just went to the library and I learned off books and records. See, so, and it just left a bad feeling with me about what school was all about, you know. So if the composition class is helping you here, well, you sure got lucky.
Yeah, it is kind of. But another thing, you do, like, obviously, like, I saw, like, your scores, like the one book you have out, and, you know, obviously, like, you know, like, all your part writing rules and all your shit, you know, and you did learn it yourself, right? You just basically got it together. All right, thank you.
Yeah, let me say one thing about school. This is kind of interesting because I went to a music school, San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and I used to play, you know, used to like to practice right after I leave these harmony classes and all that. And I did learn something, but I used to play these seventh chords, you know. I don't want to get too technical, but I used to have these little teachers who used to come over and knock on the door saying, "You can't do that. Get out of here. You're playing that evil music. You know, get out." And it was really weird. But now, like at that very same school, I taught a class there, so things have changed in a jazz class or improvisation class. So I think things are getting better.
There's another thing about music education. Up until recently, the process of live performance was de-emphasized in a music curriculum. They figure that if you're going to study music, that they should go at it from a very academic point of view. Well, I can't imagine a bigger mistake in teaching somebody and playing down live performance. If you can't play, you know, unless you become a teacher, you have no way to earn a living. So I think a music class, if it's going to be well-rounded, has to not only teach you the technical skills that you need to make music, but it should make you aware of things like what a contract is supposed to say and what can happen to you if you sign the wrong kind of a thing, what to look out for when you're doing business with a club owner, what to say if the guy tells you, well, I'm sorry, we can't pay you tonight. And, you know, getting groups together where people have some experience in group performance, so that you're not a complete dummy when you get out of school, and the only thing you can do is become a teacher to crank out more dummies.
Yes, right over here, please.
I have a question for George. I was wondering how much the synthesizer and use of it in both jazz and rock music has changed your attitudes, and Whereas it used to be sort of unique a few years ago, it's really sort of everyone's got one now, whether they can play it or not. And whether you think that it's just becoming a normal part of the musician's repertoire, you know, as far as equipment is concerned, or it's really still in a process where you can be inventive with it and you can play around with it and do things that haven't been done before.
Well, yeah, I think you can do things and with it that haven't been done before, but certain music, it depends on who's playing it and the musicianship involved and what their intentions are. Because some musicians just put it up there because they say, hey, that looks good, and they can only do one thing with it because they haven't delved into it. And actually, you know what I mean? They say, well, I got one sound, and they stay there and they don't do nothing else with it, you know. But Frank was the first person that said, hey, man, you ought to start playing synthesizer. And I said, oh, man. You know, because all I'd heard was, you know, I took a synthesizer class at school, and I said, But I got into it, and, you know, I talked to Don Preston about it, and he says, yeah, man, there's some things you can do with it. So I got into it, and I began to like it, and I began to humanize it for me. The whole point of playing synthesizer to me was to make it sound like it was coming from me. You know, not like it was coming from somebody else or a machine.
Oh, Frank, how about with a guitar synthesizer? Or I was reading about some kind of guitar where 3 of the strings could represent 3 different instruments, and you know, use the rest as a guitar or something like that.
Yes, I've played such a device. Yes.
And how is that? Is that going to become popular, or?
I'm sure it will one day, but there's a lot of technical things wrong with it, and it's not my idea of a good time.
And, well, would you rather play just a regular, you know, guitar with whatever effect, you know, the so-called normal effects now, or do you enjoy or get some satisfaction out of adding on all the other, you know, effects that a synthesizer would add to it?
Well, if they didn't get in the way of my playing, you see, the problem with that device is that there is anywhere up to an 80 millisecond delay from the time that you hit the string to the time that the synthesized note comes out. That don't mean too much to most of you here, but if you're playing fast and you got to wait 80 milliseconds for the note to come out that you just played, you're in trouble. And besides, when you start hearing if you've been playing guitar for a while and you hit a string and you know what it's supposed to sound like and what it's supposed to feel like, because you feel it coming back through your body, you know, it's conducted through your hands back to your body when the string hits, you know, and you link up with the instrument, and suddenly you hit your string and a trumpet comes out. It feels really weird.
Right in front of him, the gentleman on the next row.
Have you ever had to go long periods of time for the inspiration to write or compose music, or is this something that you could do constantly?
Well, actually, the way I'm working right now is I only write a short period of time out of the year. I mean, actually sit down at a desk and do it, you know, and the rest of the time I've learned to develop a process where I store impressions and get ideas for things and hang on to them until my schedule says, write, Frank, and then I just dump it out that time, and then the next part of the schedule is I have to teach it to the other people who are going to play it. The next part of the schedule is you record it. Next part of the schedule is you rehearse it all over again and learn it for the road. The next part of the schedule is you go out and play it, you know, and then it's a cycle like that. It's just my time is planned at least a year in advance for how things are going to go and what kind of time slots I'm going to be able to put things into. And so as far as the inspiration for things to write, I'm picking a few up right now, see? So it doesn't stop. It's just when you actually put it down on paper, it could be a very short period of time, and then you do a lot of it.
There was yes, the young lady over here, please. Would you just wait one second, please, for the mic? Thank you.
I don't like it.
Well, could you use it anyway? Thanks. Okay.
He's punishing you.
I'm punishing you.
I know.
Use this.
I have an English question I'd like you to answer. It goes, the artist is a responsible individual, responsible to himself and to no one else, is a new concept. Its Bible in English is Shelley's Defense of Poetry. Now, this is something I have to write. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the artist as
the artist responsible to no one else other than himself. Well, I think that that's a little bit presumptuous in an era of mass media, because these days if a person is an artist, and if a lot of people like his work, then suddenly he opens his mouth and goes gaga, and somebody writes it down, and somebody else reads it, and that affects their life. And you can't really take such an isolationist viewpoint anymore with information being transmitted so fast and say, yeah, I'm the only thing that matters, because I have to be careful of what I say, because I don't want to, by proxy, induce somebody to do something that I would feel harmful or counterproductive to our society in general. That's the way I look at it, and I take a responsibility for my activities in my private life. But as far as what I do in writing music, I don't see, in terms of instrumental music, how what I'm going to write is going to hurt anybody outside of maybe their mouth when they try to play it. So I just do whatever I want.
Two questions. First, on what you said before, what do you say to a club owner when he says we can't pay you tonight?
Tell them to step outside.
Okay, this is a little more interesting one. Like there seems to be like a problem, like when you play at a place like the War Memorial, right?
Yeah.
Like the audience, right, doesn't get off on you, and like you obviously can't get off on it. Like at the very end, you said, I'm not talking acoustics either.
Yeah.
Like at the very end, you said, okay, here's one you recognize, right? So you have to play that. I mean,
Right.
obviously that's a bore. You know?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a bore, but it's a situation where if we didn't play that song, most of the people in that audience would have been disappointed that we didn't play it. And if we do play it, somebody thinks that it's a bore because we played it. I happen to enjoy playing it.
Right, but like your thing, shouldn't that be like the responsibility of the artist thing? You know?
What?
I mean, like to play in the War Memorial. I mean, to attract people that that are interested in your simpler side. I mean, why are you interested in maintaining such an audience? I mean, is it for monetary gain? Perhaps, I mean, you just need that money for production. You know, I mean.
No, it's not it at all. First of all, people come to see us for a number of different reasons, and many of those reasons have nothing to do with music, simple or otherwise. A lot of times, especially when we work at college, an isolated college, we have a situation where the person has bought the ticket at the beginning of the school year as part of his student body contribution or something like that, and we could be anybody coming there, and they're coming to the concert because they already paid for it. So we are a social event that allows people to get together. That a lot of people come, they don't even know who we are, what we play. It doesn't make any difference to them. That's one aspect of it.
Yeah, you should not have any responsibility to that, right?
But the fact of the matter is, I like to play music, and somewhere along the line, some people have supposed that everything I like to do has to be so ugly that only a very few people will want to listen to it. I happen to like to play Willie the Pimp because I like to play the guitar. And because of my limitations on that instrument and the fact that I'm not too jazz enthused with a lot of chord changes, I like to play a simple.
But why in the War Memorial?
Oh, the War Memorial? Somebody booked us in there. That's it. Simple as that.
So why don't you say, well, I don't want to play there? I mean,
you know, you don't always get your choice. You know.
There's no other hall around here anywhere.
I don't even know whether there is another hall in this town. I don't know anything about Syracuse. I don't know anything about Albany. I live in California. I have a guy who books tours for me. He puts me into places where other groups play. You know, that's it.
But it's such a, you know, it's a much smaller event. Like
what?
The event is much less important, right? I mean, when there is all these, like primarily the acoustic problems, I guess. You know, I mean that you can't be really on.
All I'm saying is simply this: you do not always get to choose where you get to play. And if people want to see you, you do the best you can by playing wherever they stick you. You know, I've played, I'll tell you a bad hall, the Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center. I think that's a terrible hall, you know, and people would say, oh, that's a real nice one. It's as hard to hear on that stage as it is at the War Memorial, you know, and so you can't even guess sometimes. I mean,
of course, they've had acoustic problems. I mean, they've had problems with that hall ever since it was built.
Then why don't they do something about it?
Yeah, well, they suggested dynamite, you know.
That's a nice idea.
You know, I don't know of any hall today that's made for acoustic instrument, for electric instruments. That's designed specifically with that in mind. You know, most of the music halls are designed for acoustic instruments.
Yeah, the requirements are different. If you have an orchestra or a dance band of the old school that's playing in a hall, and they're not really going to use any amplification other than a little PA for the MC to announce the tunes, a hall like the War Memorial would probably be okay because it's resonant and it'll make acoustic instruments sound out more. But the minute that you amplify something and increase the velocity of that sound whizzing through the air and get a room with that much concrete in it, it's just going to bounce all over the place. And at the time most of those halls were built, nobody even imagined large attendance rock and roll concerts happening at 130 dB in their place. I mean, it was originally built for a completely different purpose. And it's not just that hall, but 80% of the halls that you work at in the United States.
But, by the way, I read recently where Avery Fisher Hall is going to be closed down for about 6 months, either this year or next, in order to completely redo the interior. For the acoustics. They've already spent about $20 million on the acoustics since 1963, and the building originally went up. The building itself only cost $8 million to begin with. You know. Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Frank, I was wondering, for your particular taste, what guitars and strings and wah-wahs and amps do you like to use? And also, I was wondering how you got the tape effects for that song you did on Apostrophe called Montana. And I wanted to know if George would be able to go through some of the basic principles of oscillation and modulation and synthesizer.
Huh?
I didn't hear that. I wanted to know what type of guitars, wah-wahs, strings, and amps do you like to play out of?
Okay,
And
what I'm using on stage right now is a customized Gibson SG with a mixed set of strings. The top string is a 009 Ampeg string. The B string is a Gibson E string. And the G string is a Ernie Ball 15. And the D string is a Rickenbacker D string. And the A string is a Rickenbacker E string. And the low E string is a Gibson 340 A string. And
I was wondering how you got the tape effects for Montana.
The what?
The tape effects, the voice for Montana. That song on
There is
Apostrophe.
no tape effect on Montana.
For the voices, the vocals.
What about it? Montana doesn't have any tape effect on the voice.
Well, the vocals, they seemed really freaked out, like they were
Oh, you mean
yours,
the ones that are speeded up?
Right.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was
All you
wondering how
do,
you
the
did
way you
it.
do that is you take the master tape and you slow it down a minor third, and the girls sing on it here, and then when you play it back to normal speed, the track is normal speed, and the voices are speeded up. They do it with a device called a VSO, variable speed oscillator.
Did you do that yourself, or did someone else do
I
that?
did it. I even turned the knob on the oscillator myself.
I want to thank you, Mr. Zappa, for coming today very
All right,
much.
Mr. Krantz.
And along with you two gentlemen, too, from the mothers. Okay, thank you.
If that guy with the broken leg will wait there, I'll sign his cast.
Great. Thank you very much.